What's up? I'm your host, Ricky Bernays. Just going to give you the heads up on a couple things. First, I'm super excited to be back. I hope to get these shows out quicker and faster and more shows out. Life gets in the way at times, which it has. And also, we went on a couple weeks where we didn't put out a show because I was upgrading my computer software and I didn't want to schedule anybody in between. So I wanted to give myself a big enough hole to kind of do everything just in case I ran into a computer problem. I could fix it and not worrying about some deadline. So I'm excited. That's out of the way. One of the things I did, one of the upgrades, one of the new things that we're doing now is our video episode is going to be split screen. So unless a guest calls in and only wants to do an audio interview, which is kind of rare, you're going to see a split screen of our video episode. So it gives you incentive to check out our YouTube channel and our video versions, and you'll see me and the guests with the split screen. So that's exciting. And also, we have Guy Evans on the show, which I'm super excited about because he was one of my first guests, and him and James Corbett and Danielle Bignelli and Douglas Ruskoff were basically helped build the foundation of the show because they gave me credibility to get future guests on. So without those guys, who knows? And so I'm super excited to have these guys back. We talked about Donald Sterling briefly, but it was before the banning and the fine. So if you're wondering why we're not talking about it in the show, it's because it hasn't happened yet. It was the day before. So I'll probably talk more about it in future episodes. But in this episode, we kind of talk about, the initial reports. And so that's why. The other thing is at the end of the show, I'm going to have, I don't know why I keep saying we, it's just me. But I'm going to put Eteria, one of my songs from my music project, Theory 6, which is also the project that does the theme song for this podcast called The Ripple Effect. And I know the podcast is called Ripple Effect, but the song is also called The Ripple Effect, just in case it confuses the shit out of anybody. And but at the end of the show, you're going to hear the song Eteria. It's available everywhere: Google Play, iTunes, Shazam, wherever you can get music. And I'm going to put like a shorter version, kind of lower quality. And if you want a higher quality full version of it, you can get it all those places where you can get MP3s. And I think that's about it. But look forward to a bunch of really awesome guests coming up. Don't want to give you exact dates or exact names because some people take a while before they actually figure out a date that works or we figure out schedules that work. So I don't want to say somebody's name and then not have them on for another month or two. So but we definitely have some people scheduled, and I'm definitely excited about the guests. So I'll keep bringing interesting people, and hopefully you guys keep enjoying it. Another thing real quick before I go, all the new listeners from the Zeitgeist movement, the Ben McLee show did awesome, surpassed all my personal bests, and I can't thank those guys enough. I can't thank Ben enough. I can't thank all the Zeitgeist movement supporters enough to come check out my show and support the Ripple Effect. So I'll keep bringing interesting people and interesting filmmakers and documentaries and authors and anybody that I find interesting or I find their work interesting. I'll put them on the show. And the Zeitgeist movement is no different. And I'm glad that I can kind of, I guess, maybe expose some people who don't know anything about it to the movement and their ideas. So with that said, enjoy the show, and I'll see you guys next time. What's up, everybody? Another episode of the Ripple Effect podcast. Today we got a really awesome show. I'm really excited because we have one of our first returning guests and one of our second guests overall on the show, the very nice and polite Guy Evans, who was cool enough to come on the show when he had no idea I'd ever even make it to episode, whatever this is, 27. And so I just want to thank Guy Evans for being with us. If you guys don't know who he is, he has Smells Like Human Spirit podcast. It's a really awesome podcast. It was before I got into podcasting, it was one of the ones I used to listen to, and I still listen to. He has tons of awesome guests. If you like the platform of this podcast, you'll enjoy his. He's had Noam Chomsky, Michael Ruppert, which hopefully we could talk about a little bit today, and tons of people. So definitely check that out. So thanks for being with me, Guy.
Very nice and polite. I like it. Thank you for the introduction. Well, listen, Ricky, it's great to be back on the show again. I'm proud to be your first returning guest.
Yeah. You and James Corbett were awesome because I was really surprised the first time I actually heard back from you guys, and I remember being like a kid, like with a celebrity, email me back. I'm like, holy shit, they actually wrote back, because I didn't really expect it. And even if you listen to like some of our earlier podcasts when me and Dave were talking, I remember saying, oh, I don't know if we're going to be able to get any guests, but we'll try. And we were kind of, just joking around about it, not thinking that we'd have any luck with that. So it's awesome that it has worked out. And, I guess if you work hard and you're really passionate about it, you can you can get it accomplished and little by little build a podcast. And just like yourself and I, and hopefully if people are listening, do the same thing. You put in the work, and especially in the podcast community, because I'm sure you probably I've noticed that too, that everybody in the podcast community, unlike like a lot of other communities, there's no haters for the most part. Like everybody's like really nice, and we support each other instead of like saying, oh, this is the competition, so let's bash them. Is that one thing that you've noticed too, that in the podcast world, how cool everybody is?
Absolutely. And I point to someone like Dan Carlin. Oh, excuse me, I'm losing my voice already. Someone like Dan Carlin as a great example of that. This is someone who has not just one, but two very popular podcasts, Hardcore History and Common Sense. And I remember the first time that I interviewed him, and I asked him, do you have any final words before we sign off today? And he said, it's important for everyone in the podcast community to help each other out. And he said, I'm happy to be on your show today, and I'm happy to help you out in any way that I can. And, when you have one of the leaders in the genre, for lack of another way of putting it, with that type of attitude, I think it kind of filters down to everyone else. And you certainly see that with not only a lot of people that you've interviewed, Ricky, but I think a lot of the people at the forefront of the whole the podcast thing. There's definitely this ethic of sort of mutual, looking out for one another, basically, which is pretty refreshing. And it's interesting because a lot of the people at the top of podcasting in terms of popularity, they have a radio background. And, I never worked in radio, but from what I know and from what I would imagine, it can be pretty cutthroat. It's very competitive. You're battling for ratings and battling for listeners. So it's pretty interesting that podcasting really, the opposite is sort of in effect. The opposite sort of ethic is present. It's not so much about trying to beat out everyone else. It's about, what can we do to help each other out and help the genre grow. And for people like us who listen to a lot of podcasts, and everyone listening to this, we may think that podcasting is this huge thing, but the reality is most people out there still don't know what a podcast is. Most people don't listen to them on a daily basis. So whatever we can do to help the whole thing grow as a whole is going to help everyone's podcast individually. So not to be long-winded, to answer your question, that's definitely something that I've picked up on as well, and long may it continue.
Yeah, it's crazy because that's so true. It's funny how many people I meet still don't know what a podcast is, and I always describe it as, it's like an online radio show, but you can listen to it at any time. It's like a radio show on demand, and
yep.
And so it is so weird that I remember when we first started this podcast, I figured 6 months later, or however long I've been doing it, by now, like the popularity would just keep booming, and most people would know what it is. But yeah, it's very surprising. I mean, maybe it has something to do with the fact that like a lot of the people who listen to podcasts, there are people who look for more information and thought-provoking things, and some of the people I ask are people who don't really want something thought-provoking. They're the ones who are going to watch E! Entertainment, not the History Channel. So the cool thing is that we do have a community for people who are looking for a little bit more, or looking for Hardcore History by Dan Carlin. And it's funny because your story about Dan Carlin, not to change subjects real quick, but he said the same thing with us, and he was one of my biggest influences on starting a podcast. Not so much influences on his podcast can influence me to start a podcast, but he did a podcast with, I can't remember what show it was, but he was basically saying, hey, if you want to start a podcast, definitely do it. Let's get this community bigger. Don't even think about it, just do it. And he's like, and also email some people that you would like on your show, and he's like, you'll be surprised how many people will write you back and be on. And I'm like, there's no way. There's no way that people are gonna be on. And I was wrong. People end up writing me back, and I'm like, holy shit, Dan Carlin was right. So that was awesome. And so what do you think is the difference between radio and podcasting? Is it because like most of us are working for ourselves on our own, and we're doing it for the passion, and when you work for a radio station, you're doing it you have bosses that you have to keep happy and make it more about being competitive than
I mean the obvious difference is the lack of commercial pressures for the most part. When you're producing a podcast, you're not trying to fulfill someone else's goals or someone else's agenda or keep your job. You really are following what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, and I think that translates this is a generalization, but I would venture to say that translates in more of an interesting listening experience to a lot of radio shows, because you listen to a podcast, and for the most part, they don't have to conform to these to this kind of tight structure that a lot of radio shows have, where there may be a 8-minute segment and then a commercial and then another segment and so on. That's something that's great about podcasts. But I think, one thing to kind of be a little bit concerned about from my vantage point as far as the future of podcasting is, and I'm not sure if you've picked up on this as well, Ricky, and the people listening, but it is starting to become more and more commercialized. And what I mean by that is now we're getting big media entities that are really investing in podcasting, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it has the potential to kind of dilute the whole art form, which is podcasting. Increasingly you're getting celebrities and well-known media figures who have made their name in the mainstream or traditional media, who are now launching their own podcasts. That's happening more and more. In fact, it seems like every other week I check the iTunes rankings, and some other B-list celebrity has now started a podcast. And there's two ways of looking at it. Either you can say that's going to just draw more listeners to podcasting as a whole, and therefore it'll help everyone else. But the other way of looking at it is, if the genre becomes too infiltrated with these people who already have an established audience, then people like yourself, you're starting from a point of zero, and you're just trying to get an audience that's hopefully passionate and cares about what you're doing. People like you are going to be drowned out, and there's going to be no room for those people kind of doing it on their own accord, in their own time, without the major financial backing, if that makes sense. So not to go too far from your original question, I think podcasting as it stands is a wonderful thing. It's a beautiful thing. It allows people like us to express ourselves in an unfiltered way, in a very human and very natural way. But I do think it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves over the next few years. And I think there is going to be a bit of a battle between the commercial entities who see it as simply another thing we can make money off, and the people who really believe in what it stands for.
Yeah. But I think that those people who do it for the wrong reasons, who do it because it's just a way of, I guess, an easy way of getting more promotion or getting more money and get advertising. I mean, like a lot of people like you and I, like we started doing it probably because in my case, I wanted an excuse to talk to really cool people, and people that I listen to, like you and Daniele and a bunch of other people that I'm a fan of, Dan Carlin, and like I have an excuse to email you guys and sit down and talk to you guys and meet people that I would never get to meet, and it's cool because it's almost like I get to meet people that if they lived near me, they'd be my friends, they'd be people I'd be hanging out with, So it's like I get an opportunity to like meet these really cool people that are like-minded and are interested in the same things, and you hear a lot of other podcasters talk about how the thing about podcasting, what people like, I think it has something to do with the fact that there's a lot of topics that maybe people don't have anybody to talk to about, and podcasting is their way of like, they kind of feel. And the thing is too, you're capturing a real conversation. I think you touched on it before we started recording. Just all the real popular podcasts, I think that's what it captures. It captures this. It's as close to a real conversation as you could get. And don't get me wrong, when you hit record, do you second guess, or in my case, do I think a little more before I talk than I would in when I'm not recording? Absolutely. But for the most part, once I get going and the show gets going, I forget that I'm recording, and it's free, and it's as close as me sitting at a bar having a drink and bullshitting as you can get. So I definitely think that the other people who come in and they're going to have advertisements because they don't care, because they're just going to care about making a little extra money, and but you're right. I mean, and they probably won't last either. But you might be right about the fact that they might take attention away from other really good podcasters. People are going to listen to theirs just because they're celebrities, and then might not give the chance to the up and coming podcasts that people might not know who they are. And like you said, starts from scratch, like myself. So it can. Who knows? I'm crossing my fingers that those type of podcasts don't last, and the good ones, just like music, music has trends, and us both being music fans, like we know, like there's a lot of trends in music, things will happen, artists will blow up because they fit in this trend, but the good ones always end up lasting and outlasting those other ones. So
absolutely. And I think, as you put it, time will tell and people will decide what they want to listen to and what they don't. And just to be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong whatsoever with someone, using podcasting or anything else to make a living or, make some money. That's wonderful if you can turn your passion into your livelihood. But I think when the sole objective is simply to extract as much money out of something as possible and the quality is neglected as a result, that's when I have an issue with it. And, I've listened to some podcasts, and I'm not going to be specific, but some that are produced by these big media entities that, I'm sure there's an audience for it, but really they don't hold a candle to a lot of people who are producing it independently or producing their show with much smaller means. And that's really the amazing thing about podcasts, is that there are individuals out there who, with very limited time, in some cases, with a very limited budget, sometimes zero budget, are producing these incredibly informative and entertaining and engaging shows. And, on the bright side, I think one thing that's really going to help the growth of podcasting is, if you think about it, when podcasting kind of went through its first boom, so it was almost a decade ago now, the way that you listen to a show, you basically had to sit there at your PC and, download a show to your device or listen to it in iTunes. And now it's completely different. Everyone's listening to it on their cell phone. And I think the mobile component is the future. And I think once more people are aware of just how easy it is to subscribe to these things and listen to these things on the go, that's when you're going to see even more growth. So although I am a little bit concerned, as I said, about some people getting into it for the wrong reasons, you're absolutely right. That happens with everything in life, whether it be music, television, whatever the case may be. But I do see certainly a lot of growth in the years to come.
Yeah, you're definitely right, and I think that the phone thing is going to change a lot, because even in my case, I've talked to people about my podcast. They'll come up and they're like, "Oh, you do a podcast?" I'm like, "Yeah," and they're like, "Oh, where can I find it?" I'm like, "What do you have? Apple or Android?" I'm like, "Oh, you have Android?" I'm like, download Stitcher, download OneCast or Beyondcast. I'm like, "It's a free app. Download it." I'm like, "I'll show you how to subscribe to it in 2 seconds. You can get it." And they're like, "Holy shit, that was easy." So I think that you're right. Before, what I used to do was download it on iTunes, put it on my iPod, and it was just, I subscribed everything via iTunes, so it was just easier that way to keep up with it. Where, like you said, now it's just keeps getting easier and easier, and I think hopefully people pick up on it and they realize I can listen to it in my car, I can listen to it, on a train or wherever, and because of it, I can listen to something thought provoking instead of the same old crappy music on on the same radio stations or the same talk radio. They're going to talk about the same topics over and over again. And right. I mean, you look at Mike and Mike in the Morning on ESPN, and they, in the middle of, like, between sentences, they'll just throw out an advertisement, and it'll be like, "Oh, this is brought to you by blah 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 blah," and then they'll go right back in the conversation. And I'm like, that sucks. It's like we're so used to, like, or like, I think we're going to get more and more used to, and many of us already used to, just bypassing commercials. We watch TV on YouTube, we watch TV on Netflix, we watch House of Cards completely all, you can watch the whole season in one weekend, like I did. Unfortunately, I watched all season 2 in like one weekend, and and so I think that type of radio and that type of TV with commercials and advertisements, people are going to be like, holy shit, like, I like podcasting and I like YouTube and I like these things, because they didn't have that. So when these other bigger corporations, who can't avoid trying to make a little extra advertising money and marketing money, because they're not going to say no to marketing when they get paid, and with me or you, we might say, hey, you know what, that's not worth it, or that, so I think that that might be a difference maker too. So we'll see.
Yeah, you could be right. And I mean, of course, to a certain extent, we do need commercials. We do need advertising for these platforms to exist, and if that component was completely eliminated, you'd have a lot less people making a living from this and from radio and so on. But I think I get the gist of what you're saying there. Content that is produced purely just to drive people to the commercials and doesn't really have anything of substance to say. I think that's what we're all used to. And I know that was a revelation that I had when I started listening to podcasts. I was just blown away by the quality of audio that was produced by people in their own homes or in a small studio. It's unbelievable what one person or a small group of people can do. And one thing we haven't even talked about is this patent troll lawsuit, which I think is, not to get too negative, that's something else to kind of be concerned about as well. But yeah, I think it's a matter of education. Once people are fully aware of exactly what podcasting is and how they can actually listen to the shows, it's going to be great for all of us. But it's certainly a really enjoyable sort of world to be in.
The patent law, is that, you're not talking about the thing that Adam Carolla is involved in, are you?
That's correct. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. You want to tell for my listeners who might not know what it is, and I could do I could give an attempt of explaining it, but you might be better informed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the Cliff Notes version is that there's a guy, his name escapes me at this point, who back in the day established a company called Personal Audio, and claims he has a patent on audio in a serialized sort of system, or in an episodic sort of way. I haven't explained that very well, but basically he used to have a company, I believe it was in the 90s, which was based around sending out audio recordings of magazine articles. So he would, basically articulate what different magazine articles said, put it on a cassette tape, send it out to different people, kind of like a compilation tape of various stories and so on. At least that's my understanding. And, it didn't really take off, as you can imagine. And now this individual has seen the growth of podcasting and seen that a lot of people are making not just a living from it, but a good living from it, and has basically said, look, I own a patent on this type of content. If you were producing audio in an episodic format, one show after another, that's something that I have a patent on. And it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like something that wouldn't really be a threat to anyone. But if you listen to what Adam Carolla says, if you listen to what Mark Maron has to say, I know Joe Rogan's talked about it with Adam Carolla on his show, it's pretty clear that it's for real and it's a serious threat. I know if you go on Adam Carolla's website, you can find out how to kind of donate to his legal campaign, because he's actually being sued because of all of this. And that's something I definitely encourage people to look into. But, I guess in a way it's kind of symbolic of how far podcasting has come, that it's got the attention of a patent troll who's decided that it's a big enough industry that we can actually make some money from it. But if it's actually ruled in his favor, it could be highly detrimental to everyone doing this type of thing, because you might have to pay, some sort of rights fee or some sort of percentage to this guy who, quite frankly, hasn't done any of the work, has never produced a podcast himself, what we know as a podcast, but claims he owns a patent on the whole thing. And I did an episode on this. I forget the number of the episode. If people go back about a month or so, where I explain it in much better terms than I just did. But that's pretty much the long and short of it.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy that this guy is trying to sue for putting things in like order, basically. Like using numbers to list your podcast. It's so insane. And Adam Carolla, I've heard him talk about it, and even recently, like you said, when he was on the Rogan podcast, and he said, hey, if we don't basically send a message to this guy and say, hey, you're not going to get away with this shit, all he's going to do is look at the next big podcast and then sue them and then sue the next one and sue the next one, and there'll be no end to it. So, that's kind of what sucks about the legal system, is the fact that, they always say, like, nobody likes a lawyer until you need one. And but it's in many cases, sometimes it opens things up to this bullshit, because it's just, unfortunately, when you look at just the system in general, a lot of things are in favor of people who have money, can afford lawyers, and those are usually the ones who don't get locked up, and compared to somebody with less money who can't afford, going to court, or can't afford a good lawyer or a lawyer in general. So, this type of stuff happens in all different types of cases, and unfortunately, when people find an easy way of making money, they're going to try to take advantage of it. My understanding is that this is kind of not uncommon for these type of lawsuits. I don't know where he's from, but I remember Adam Carolla talking about where he was from and how that's kind of not uncommon in those neck of the woods, right?
Well, I think there's a jurisdiction or a district in East Texas which is seen as very friendly towards this type of thing, and I know that the guy himself doesn't live there, but I think it's part of the strategy if you are one of these so-called patent trolls that you do kind of launch things from there, because they do look at it quite favorably. And I know, if you do some reading about this, Apple has already paid out some sort of settlement to Personal Audio going back a couple of years. So they've already kind of made inroads into this thing. And I know Adam Carolla's lawyers have told him it's going to be about 1.5 million to fight this type of litigation. So I think he's still got a long way to go as far as fundraising. But I think if anyone cares about the future of podcasting and you have a spare few dollars, it's definitely something that you should consider.
Yeah, definitely. And I know I briefly brought up ESPN, so let's talk about the subject that's all over ESPN, and that's the Sterling thing. Donald Sterling and his alleged comments talking about his girlfriend, which I'm still a little confused about, because I'm pretty sure he has a wife and a girlfriend. I guess when you're loaded, you can have both. I'm guessing it's only because he has money and not because he's a Mormon or anything. So,
well, yeah, from what I understand, it's a past girlfriend. I'm not sure how long they've been separated, and I know his wife has come out and referred to him in a statement as her estranged husband. So again, I don't know when that relationship dissolved, but yeah, you're right. It does get a bit confusing when sometimes you see an image of his wife, and then the next thing you know, they're talking about his girlfriend. But that's kind of my understanding of it. Yeah,
that whole thing's nobody really clarified it. It's like they're focused on what he said, and they're just giving out all these random facts, but nobody's like connecting the dots. And I'm just like, well, somebody explain to me what's going on. Is he dating this chick? And it's like they had pictures of him with his girlfriend, and then 2 seconds later, like, oh, this is what his wife said. And I'm just like, wait, am I the only one who doesn't get this? So he has a girlfriend and a wife. But the whole thing is crazy because even though obviously it's insane that he got recorded a personal conversation. I mean, which is another thing that we're like nobody's really putting any attention on. And I'm not saying what he said was right by any stretch of imagination. I mean, both of us play basketball, and I'm obviously you and to a higher level than I do. But we're obviously both around black people and Hispanic people and different types of people all the time playing basketball. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about sports. It kind of brings together tons of different cultures and nationalities, and so. It's weird to see somebody who owns an NBA team to be racist. An NBA team that a sport, basketball, which is mostly dominated by African Americans and black people. So to be racist but own the team for as long as he did, how does that make any sense? Is he not a basketball fan? He's doing it as a financial investment. Well, what do you think's going on?
Well, I think if you look at his background, from what I understand about the man, he made his money in real estate. So I think it's the case with a lot of owners of sports teams. It's not exactly as if they were an aficionado of the sport at the time that they purchased the team. I think it's pretty safe to say that he probably saw Los Angeles as a great opportunity to have a sports team as a bit of a novelty and make some money from it. But although, what he said and what's come out is completely reprehensible and disgusting, quite frankly, and, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are already familiar with the story. If you aren't, you can just Google Donald Sterling and you'll find the transcript or the audio there. While on one hand, it's, as I said, it's completely deplorable. People forget that this man has a history of at least being accused of making these type of statements or having these type of attitudes before. Not just some racially charged sort of statements that he's made in the past, but also I think back to a few years ago when he had Baron Davis on his team, who was at one time a fantastic player, and then was kind of a little out of shape one season for the Clippers, and there were stories about him heckling his own player from his owner's seat and things like that.
Really?
Right, and conduct that's not really appropriate for an owner, and that's probably among the most minor of his offenses, because I think there was don't quote me on this, but I think it was a Sports Illustrated article a couple of days ago. Just kind of there was one cataloging all of his statements over the years that pretty offensive statements towards not just African Americans but other ethnicities as well. So when I first saw the story, I was shocked, but at the same time, I wasn't entirely shocked because I've always heard rumblings from people who write about sports who are based in the LA area or people who are just familiar with that scene. I've always heard rumblings that he did kind of sort of have these prejudices and this attitude towards minorities. It's very ugly. The one thing that I was disappointed about, and maybe it's not for me to say, maybe I can't comment on this really, but I was a little bit disappointed in the actions of the Clipper players. I think the game was last night, maybe in the day before. All these days are kind of molding together. Was it last night?
Yeah, it was last. Well, it was actually. Maybe it was an earlier game because I know the Blazers and Houston Rockets wore all black socks, and
right.
And, yeah, there's some. So now I'm thinking, was that the protest that happened yesterday? They might have both happened last night, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think maybe the Clipper game was a little bit earlier. I don't remember, but the players did make a statement. They did wear their warm-up jerseys inside out and put their jackets down at half court on top of each other in kind of symbolic gesture of togetherness and all that type of stuff, and a little bit of a act of rebellion towards the organization. But I think something as serious as this, there really could have been a strong message made that this is completely intolerable. It might sound like a radical idea, but something like the players perhaps boycotting the game, and I know that might sound crazy to some people, but some things, in fact, a lot of things are more important than some trivial sports game. And when the owner of your franchise has been making these statements, and I think it's pretty much confirmed that it was him. And as I said, he has a history of this type of thing, not as well broadcast, but it's been fairly well known that he has these opinions. When this stuff comes out, I think it's not a stretch to suggest that maybe they should have boycotted the game or done something a little bit more serious to really drive home the message that this is completely unacceptable. And so I was a little bit disappointed that they just went ahead, played the game. Clearly they were distracted. They weren't at their best. But I think people always talk about teachable moments when it comes to race relations, and this was a perfect one right here. This was a missed opportunity in my view, but who knows, something may happen later this week. But I think there was a message that could have been sent there, in my opinion.
Well, he definitely does have a tainted history because Elgin Baylor sued him once for I think some type of racial thing when he was working for the Clippers. I know that he had a history with it was in like 2006, the LA Times. He talked about building a homeless shelter or something in the Skid Row area,
and he never got around to doing it.
Yeah, he never got around to doing it. But I guess his ads he still has his ads for his foundations, in magazines and stuff. But yet it doesn't do anything. I know his son got in trouble for like shooting his best friend over like dispute over a Saved by the Bell episode or something like that. It was something really crazy. So it was just and then I think he ended up tragically I think he overdosed by Oxycontins or I think it was a mixture of Oxycontins and something else. And so I mean he definitely has a wild history, and definitely didn't there's to say that there weren't any signs of this guy being maybe not all there or having some extreme opinions or even just being accused of racist comments. And I mean, what he said was pretty extreme. One thing that still seems weird is the fact that nobody's talking about why was this guy's phone call recorded. Not that I want to take away from the fact that he said these things, but I mean, it's funny because I had a conversation with this kid, this black kid, Saturday night, and we're talking about the Sterling thing, and he was talking about how his girlfriend's Polish, and he's like, "Oh, I call her Polak, and she calls me the N-word." He's like, "I know that it's between us," and he's like, "If somebody listened to us have a conversation, they could blow it out of proportion or there." I'm like, well, I'm not sure it's exactly the same thing, but I know what he means. But the point of I'm getting to is that he was a black guy willing to have a conversation with me, a white male, about racism, and that's one thing I really appreciate. And we were talking about that, how it was cool that one thing we need to have more of is that we need to look at all, and Doc Rivers said it, and that, it's not a white or black thing, it's a people thing, and it's discriminating against anybody is a bad thing. And that's, and that's the way we should all look at things. I've said this many a times on this podcast about separating each other with politics, and in this case, skin color and race and nationality. And we need to look at all people as just people. And I think that these type of conversations, and I do have a lot of black friends and who I have conversations about race with, and I know that there's a lot of people who say, who are we to have an opinion, who are we, but it's, because we don't know what they went through, and in many cases they're correct. But I think that, if two people are having a honest conversation about these topics, I think it's a good thing. I Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith, not that I'm fans of either one of them, but I briefly saw them talking about it on ESPN, and I think these are conversations that we should have publicly, and we should be willing to talk about, and we shouldn't just say, hey, it's too touchy of a subject, we shouldn't talk about it. And so I'm glad that it's at least sparking the conversation. I mean, obviously it's a shitty way of sparking a conversation about this, but obviously racism still exists, and I think that to pretend it doesn't, and to pretend that even the war on drugs, which I think I had Adam Scorgi on from the filmmaker from The Culture High and the Union, the Business of Getting High, and we're talking about the war on drugs, and how a lot of people consider that a war on race, that it's an excuse to lock up minorities. So, but these are things that people find taboo to talk about, and I think that we should be talking about it. Do you agree that it's subjects that, we shouldn't stray away from and be open to conversate about?
Absolutely. And I think that as long as you're a human being, you're allowed to comment on these type of things. I mean, clearly, as with anything, some people are going to be much more affected by these issues than others. But I think in general, every single person walking the planet has had to deal with some sort of perhaps discrimination, or some sort of some obstacles or adversity. Again, some people much more than others. But I do think it's something that we should allow the opinions of people from all backgrounds to talk about. I think the disappointing thing for me, I talked about the actions of the Clipper players maybe being a bit limited, and I felt that maybe they could have gone the extra mile to really make a statement and really drive this home, particularly, to show the young people that look up to them that this is completely unacceptable. The biggest disappointment to me, and this is, we're going quite general here, I'm trying not to stray off the topic, is just it's upsetting that we're still trying to patch together and fix so many issues that were caused by the generations previous to us. It doesn't just go back generations, it goes back centuries, millennia even. The hatred, the persecution, the discrimination, the racism. We just have a human history littered with so many horrific injustices and abuses of people, and it's really quite upsetting to see that, it's 2014, and I do think we've come a long way, but still there's so much kind of overspill from the past that we're still suffering from now, and we're still trying to deal with. And I think that really prevents us from having that perspective that you articulated there, that we are all one, not to sound too hippie-ish. We do have the most important things in common. We really have the least important things that are different about us, the superficial things, but really we are the same. And I think one thing that really prevents us from getting to that point of understanding is just you take a look in the history books, and you'll see, as I mentioned, all types of horrific things. So I do think that, clearly Donald Sterling is, as a man of a certain generation, that those views are no longer reflected by many people in society, and rightfully so. We're talking about someone born in the 30s, someone who is clearly lives a privileged life and looks at the world through a much different lens than we do. And for someone who holds those type of views, I think people like him, people of his ilk, they, the only way that's going to be eradicated is when they die, quite frankly, as harsh as that may be to say. because I do think for younger people and a younger generation, kind of holding those views is completely unacceptable. But just the last thing that I'll say, not to ramble on, you mentioned your conversation with your friend who said that him and his girlfriend kind of exchange, words to each other in terms that may not be seen as being particularly acceptable in wider society. I think, a lot of people certainly do that, and a lot of people can relate to that. But I think it's not so much the words that he was using in this tape recording. It's really the intent behind what he's saying, and kind of the overall spirit, for lack of a better word, of his or the rhetoric, I should say, of his message. It was very, very sort of hate-filled sort of sentiment behind it. That's the word that I'm looking for. So I think rather than kind of analyzing a particular word or sentence that he said, it's more so just the general attitude of his views. And as you said, it's incredible that a man who is an owner in a league which is 75% to 80% African American, it's incredible that he would think these type of things. And I think he should be removed from power, in my opinion, not just because of this incident, but because of all the litany of other things that have happened in his past. But from what I understand, it might be quite tricky for the NBA to take that step. I'm just watching some of the coverage last night, and I think if an owner violates sort of the financial regulations, not paying tax or violating the salary cap and things like that, they can be removed pretty easily. But it gets much more tricky when we're talking about something like this.
Yeah, and with the new commissioner, he definitely has his, his hands full with, with a huge issue like this. His first, basically his first playoffs, his first year being a commissioner. So we'll see how he handles this. I know all eyes are on him. I know some people believe that if he just waits it out a little bit, people will relax a little bit. They'll forget about it a little bit, and maybe he'll calm down, and then he won't have to do such or have such extreme, do something so extreme to the owner. So we'll see. I mean, obviously the media is gonna, they're gonna jump on this. I think many people are angry. I think obviously there's always going to be some media that just wants to cover the big story. And but I definitely think that it's an important issue. And I think what you hit on, intentions are so important behind what you say. I have a couple really opinionated black friends, and they'll be the first ones to say, they're like, listen, I don't have a problem if you call me the N-word. He's like, we're friends, and I'm like, I don't feel comfortable doing it. And they're like, listen, it's like intentions. It's that's the difference maker. If someone, and they're absolutely right. Like if somebody's saying something to you, I'm Portuguese. There's not really many racial slurs to the Portuguese people, or any real words that I guess to try to be hurtful. But I guess if you're Polish or black or Hispanic, whatever it is, if it's a friend calling you it and you guys are joking around, that they're calling it, even the N-word. A lot of, you get white people that are like, oh, well, how come they can say it? Because they don't have a history of using it to harm people's feelings and using it to, obviously the history behind the word with white people using it. And intentions is I think the difference maker. When you look at when two black people call each other the N-word, they know they're only saying it, what they mean is, hey, what's up, bro, or what's up, homie, or what's up, what's up, friend, where if somebody you don't know uses it, they could be using it in a harmful way, purposely trying to make you angry, and so intentions is a big part of it, and I think that like I said, I think it's a good thing to talk about these things. I think if you're a human, we've all had in some way been discriminated against. I grew up being a metalhead in high school and middle school. I used to wear Iron Maiden shirts and Metallica shirts, and I wasn't necessarily in the clique and in the popular group of kids for a long time, and and I had my share of people making fun of me and stuff like that, and I'm not comparing that obviously to what African Americans have to deal with, but I definitely think that like you said, we all in some sense, it reminds me of that movie Crash, we all it kind of gives you a perspective from a Muslim point of view, a Hispanic point of view, black point of view. So it's one of those things where I think we all in some way get have dealt with something similar to it. Probably not, obviously not to that extreme. And but it's an interesting story. I'm glad that it's sparking conversation. I mean, like I said, unfortunately, it's a shitty thing, but it's, you know, I think it's good to talk about it. I think it's good to people to you know, get their opinions out there and talk about racism and not pretend that it doesn't exist anymore, because I think you know, that seems to be the case a lot of the times, is that we still pretend that, you know, oh, things are better, we have a black president. You know, you hear that a lot, you know, oh, we have a black president, racism is gone, you know, and it's just like, no, I'm not sure that's how it works. You know, so you know, it's interesting. Anything else you want to add on that topic?
I mean, not particularly. I think, you know, we've said enough about it, but I just think when it comes to racism as a whole, it's something that's taught. You know, it's taught in the home. It's taught by the people that you associate with. I don't think anyone at birth is genetically predisposed to hate people who look different than them. I think it's something that it's an attitude that you take on from your peers and from people you look up to if you don't have good role models at an early age. And you're right, you know, as much as we want to think that we're past all this stuff, clearly we aren't. I don't think this is going to be the last incident of this nature, but I also think it's important not to blow things out of proportion. You know, I know that I've got actually a couple of emails from friends who have said this is indicative of sports owners. They all share these views. They're all of this mentality, and I don't think that's true whatsoever. I think we need to recognize this is one man. His opinions and his attitudes are deplorable. Let's do what we can to get him out of sports, out of any decision-making position, out of any position of power, and then just move past that. So that's pretty much all I have to say about it.
Well, I think what people mean by those emails that I don't know what they mean, but I know, I think in some cases, because I've heard a lot of the same conversation that, oh, he's not the only owner. And I think that some people, that's what they mean. They mean that don't assume that he is the only owner that feels this way, you know. And
right, yeah, that could be true.
Yeah, so I think that you know, that they're probably right. I mean, he might be just one that obviously got, seems like he got set up and got caught, which, you know, I guess if somebody set him up and invaded his privacy to only expose a scumbag anyways, then I guess I'm not going to be too upset that somebody invaded his privacy. But you know, but yeah, I think that, you know, I've heard some of that conversation too, and I think that's what they mean, that, you know, don't assume. But I mean, I guess that's kind of fucked up too, to assume that every rich white guy's you know, racist. You know, it's I'm not sure that's the case either. So
well, I mean, again, if there's evidence to suggest that more than one NBA owner, since we're on the subject, feels this way, then I think we can confidently say that, okay, this is a bigger problem than just Donald Sterling. This is actually a very poisonous and disturbing culture at play here. But I think as of right now, we don't really know that for certain. And don't get me wrong, I'm not an apologist for people who own sports teams. I think there are a lot of people, as we talked about before, who have got in that particular industry not for the right reasons. And there are a lot of owners who don't care about their players, who don't care about the fans. They just see it as an investment or something to add to their portfolio. And you're right, I have no doubt that behind closed doors, there are probably owners who have, you know, said similar things. But to kind of generalize it and say that everyone shares that mentality, I think once you go down that road, I mean, where does it stop? Then anyone who sort of commits any sort of atrocity, do we then apply the same judgment on everyone who happens to be in their demographic or their race or their gender? I mean, sometimes I think we just got to look at things on a case-by-case basis. But again, you know, we could be talking about this a year from now, and there could be more stories about more owners. You know, who knows? Yeah,
definitely. So let's get into something that happened also recently. Michael Ruppert's suicide.
Yeah.
How fucking crazy is that? And you had him on your show, what, once or twice?
Three times, actually. Yeah.
Oh, how?
And
yeah.
And not to interrupt you, Ricky, but the crazy thing is, you know, he committed suicide on a Sunday, and he was actually sort of penciled in to be on my show on the Thursday, just 4 days later.
That's fucking crazy.
So that's what, yeah, that's kind of adds another layer to it, I guess.
Yeah, that's insane. And did you? I haven't got a chance to listen to that last what is it, Lifeboat Hour show of his.
Yes,
but
yes.
I know I was kind of curious to listen to it to see if there was any signs of like depression or anything that kind of would lead you to believe that this guy's about to, shoot himself after this show. Have you had a chance to listen to it, or have you talked to anybody who has listened to it?
Actually, yes, I did listen to it, and as I said before with the Donald Sterling thing, that was shocking, and at the same time not shocking. And with the very sad Michael Ruppert news, is extremely sad. It's extremely depressing to think that someone that you spoke to and someone that you, interviewed, and clearly someone who had a pretty sizable base of people that really believed in what he's saying. It's very, very sad to consider what happened to him there at the end. But I mean this in the best possible way. I wasn't entirely shocked. There were some clues as far as his mindset, his psyche. If you just think about, and I'll get to the Lifeboat Hour, the final broadcast in a second, but if you go back to how he presented himself in the movie Collapse, if you go back to the more recent documentary by Vice, Apocalypse Man, which came out just a few months ago, he was clearly a very complex guy who had had a hard life. And I can't speak to knowing him personally. I never met him in face-to-face. I never spent any time with him. But I think from my conversations with him and from the statements made by people who really knew him, he was a very complex guy. He had some anger. I think he kind of felt like at times he was maybe one of the few sane people on this insane island, and he was trying to convince everyone and warn everyone and make them aware of what was going on. But, I did listen to his final broadcast, and it was a little bit eerie at times. He made statements like, I think he asked the guests that he had on the show, he asked them, how do you care for yourself when the darkness comes? He said, what can we do tonight to make each other feel better? There were things like that he said, which again kind of gave you some indication into his mindset at the time. But overall, it didn't sound like someone, and I listened to the whole show, he didn't sound like someone who was about to commit suicide. But from what I understand, pretty much immediately following that broadcast, he did it. And I think that just speaks to, there was obviously a lot of inner conflict going on, and he was a bit of a contradiction. On one hand, his public image was this man who was kind of broken down, kind of lost his patience with the world, trying to warn people about the dangers of the future. But I know from my experience talking to him off air, talking to him on the show, I find him to be a really affable, upbeat, positive guy. I don't know whether he was sort of deliberately trying to put that image out there, but I find it interesting that, I watched the movie Collapse and I thought I was going to have this really depressing conversation with him. And I remember previous to us recording, I just remember thinking, wow, what a positive man this is. And he was actually a big supporter of what I was doing. And as I mentioned, I was about to have him on the show for a fourth time. So it was very, very sad. It was surprising. It was shocking. But at the same time, I think there's a feeling of inevitability here as well, that this was always one of the likely outcomes. And I know I've read an article written by someone who was close to him, kind of saying the same thing as well, that this was always one of the possibilities. As sad as that may be, and as I don't want to be go on a downer here, but I think that was kind of the reality.
Yeah, and that Vice thing, I watched that, and that's the thing. It's like, so many people became a fan of his because he was, everything that I was into. I liked Vice, I like Rogan, I like documentaries. I saw his face everywhere. I was a huge fan of this guy, and you could definitely tell that he was like it almost seems like he was a person who saw ghosts, but nobody believed him. Like, he was telling everybody how bad the world was, and peak oil and the collapse of the economy and all this stuff. And like, everybody's like, yeah, Mike, yeah, we get it. But it's like, he was like, no, you don't really understand. I'm serious. Like, I almost felt like that. And there is probably something to the fact anytime you spend that much time researching, and that's something that I worry about myself sometimes, just researching a bunch of negative things, all the bad things in the world. I love documentaries. Most of the documentaries that suck me into watching them, to watch, are ones that are usually on negative topics. Those are the ones that intrigue me. It's either the financial collapse or the history of the Fed or some some documentary on the Freemasons or whatever. And those are the type of things that suck me in. And it's just like I could see how and I've even caught myself where at times I will research this stuff so much that I could see my mood just like, not being as upbeat as usual, and I wonder if maybe that had something to do with it, where he spends so much time putting out this information and talking about these things that maybe he didn't have that therapy. I mean, who knows? But I mean, I know that, that's always something that, I would think anybody who investigates a bunch of negative things, it's no different than I have a couple of friends that work at, prisons or friends that are police officers, and same thing. When you're constantly focusing on the shitty things in the world, you almost forget there's good things in the world, so.
Yeah, people often talk about confirmation bias as a way of saying that people who aren't informed about the world and people who are unaware, they suffer from this confirmation bias, and that kind of keeps them in the dark. But I think the same thing applies to someone who is heavily immersed in the world of trying to expose things and trying to spending a lot of their time researching about some of the more negative things that happen in the world. And again, if you listen to that final broadcast, he starts the first few minutes talking about, again, I'm going off the top of my head here, so forgive me if I'm not entirely accurate, but something about he was watching a few minutes of a TV news station, and he was seeing headlines about a stabbing here and a killing there, and he was basically using this as evidence that everything's falling apart. And he talks about in this show, in his final show, the fact that he just went on a trip to Seattle. He was doing an interview for some mainstream media entity, he didn't say which, and he talked about the fact that everything was really overwhelming, just being around so many people and being around the cameras and the studio and all this type of stuff. I think he found that overwhelming, as he said. But you're right. I think there is a danger when you immerse yourself in that type of stuff, and that's your sort of daily routine is looking into these really horrible things. That's going to affect your worldview. And I think the opposite applies. Someone who chooses to turn a blind eye to a lot of the bad stuff out there, someone who doesn't want to hear about the bad news, you can argue that maybe they have a naive worldview, and maybe they don't fully understand and get to grips with what's really happening, and they're more vulnerable as a result and more likely to be misled as a result. So, this is something I've talked about on a lot of podcasts, and it's a bit of a cliche, it's a bit of a tired point, but I do think having that balance is very, very important. I think there's a time where you have to watch a depressing documentary, but at the same time, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world to put on a sports game and kind of forget about some of these things. Otherwise, you kind of drive yourself to the point of despair. And maybe that's what happened with Michael. I know from reading his books and stuff, he had let's put it this way, a lot happened in his life. I think he almost lived 3 lives in one, and maybe just the accumulation of that kind of got too much for him. But I'm just speculating. I didn't know him on a personal level. Who knows what he was thinking. But I think there's a very good point that you make there about immersing yourself in this stuff to the point where it kind of drives you to do something like he did.
Well, I think his problem he has is the same problem that I think we all have with some people, is that it seems like it's easier to trick people than convince themselves that they're being tricked. I don't even know. I'd love to give the props to whoever came up with that quote. I can't remember where I heard it or where I read it, but it just stuck with me. And it's kind of reminds me of Michael, because it was the same type of idea. It's like he knew so many people were kind of tricked into believing that things are going to be all right, or things aren't as bad as they really are. And he's always looking at, like that example you used of him watching TV and seeing murders. I mean, that I couldn't do that. I think that, local news is just depressing because that's literally all they show is murders, rapists, and you know, and I'm like, if I watch that all the time, I'm like, it's not intriguing to me. You know, my girlfriend watches Nancy Grace, you know, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? I'm like, you get nothing out of it. You know, I'm like, there's a missing girl. Yes. I'm like, it's sad, it sucks, but there's a lot of missing girls out there. And I'm like, you can't get too consumed in this one story and then get all sad and bent out of shape because they emotionally suck you in by getting personal into the story and get you to watch because now you have emotional attachment to it. And but you know, back to the quote, it seems like it's really hard to convince people that, hey, you know, and not all people, because obviously we're because of what we do and the people we talk to, like we talk to a lot of like-minded people, but there's also a lot of people out there who, you know, will still tell you, oh, what are you talking about? You know, there's no way there's any, you know, it was just a bunch of terrorists with, you know, box cutters that took over the planes on 9/11. Oh, what are you talking about this or about that? It's like, you know, they're not even willing to listen to the conversation. And I think that when you're trying to put out information and a message and you're trying to make people more aware, and then they're not willing to listen, or you feel like nobody's paying attention to you, or not paying attention, I guess that's probably the wrong way of putting it, but they're not getting the message, then I guess that can be depressing. You know, that can be, you know, I've had conversations with people who really, like you said, just they're the opposite. They just really could care less about any serious issue. And sometimes you're talking to them and you're like, really? You just like it goes in one ear out the other. I'm like, do you not realize that this affects us all? Like, these are issues that affect us all, like it or not. You know, net neutrality affects us all. Wars affect us all. You know, our tax, you know, going up, being taxed for this, being taxed for that affects us all. So, what were you going to say, Guy?
Yeah, I'm sorry to butt in there, but I think to your point, you can probably make an argument then, with all that being said, that you need people like Michael Ruppert. You need people with opposing voices who are all over the spectrum. You need the rational folks, I think. Maybe you need the more, you know, depressing people, you know, the more sort of doomsday people. I think there's an argument to be made for that, because sometimes people do need to be made to feel uncomfortable and maybe a little bit scared in order to change. Some people will never change. Some people will never question things that they just assume to be right or to be fact. But I can't help but think it's sad that you look at that film Collapse, which I know a lot of people have watched. A lot of people listening to this, certainly, I'm sure, have seen it. And I just think in years to come, when people are stumbling across that film on Netflix or whatever the case may be, and they do a bit of research, what happened to this guy? You know, what is he doing today? And then they find out that he killed himself. It's unfortunate, because I think it kind of it hurts the overall message of what he was saying. And again, I don't necessarily believe everything that he was saying in that movie or everything that he said in general. But I think you can see where I'm getting at there, that it kind of hurts. Again, it's strange to say because he's no longer here, but it kind of hurts the credibility of his message when, you know, he kind of took himself out of the game like that. But, you know, one thing that was interesting about Michael as well, which I really admired actually from interviewing him, he wasn't someone who I would say, I know he had this reputation of being very stubborn and very close-minded, and this is how I see the world. If you don't believe me that the world is falling apart, I'm not interested. He had that kind of reputation, but from talking to him, I found him to be pretty open-minded, and he really, there was nothing that was off limits. And, you know, he told me, you can ask me whatever you want, even if you're critical of something, even if you don't agree with something I said. And that's something that I really admired about him, because if you listen to particularly my first interview of him, there were some things that I brought into question. And he didn't lose his temper. He didn't lose his cool. He was happy to answer those things. So, you know, very intelligent guy, very, like I say, he lived a full life, definitely touched a lot of people, but it's very tragic that he went out the way he did.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think that it's an awesome trait to have, the ability to listen to somebody who disagrees with you. I think too many people can't do that. You know, once you disagree with them, they get emotional, then it becomes just you know, a pissing contest, and you're just trying to win the argument, and you're not really trying to make a point. And, you know, unfortunately, you can be a very good debater, you can win an argument without actually making any real points, you know. And I think being a good debater or is a different skill than making good points, and so I think it's awesome that people like him and you and myself, we try to do our best to to try to listen to people that we disagree with. I've had plenty of people on the show that I don't agree with everything they say, and they'll call me out on something, I'll call them out on something, but we bounce ideas off each other, and that's how we progress as people, is being willing. I mean, if I just say, hey, this is my opinion on this subject, it's set in stone, and I can't, and I'm not willing to listen to any new information, I could be, later in my life, I'll get some information like, holy fuck, if I wasn't so stubborn, I would have realized I was wrong the whole time, and so it's I always say, with whatever my opinion is, as much as it sounds established, it's never fully established, because I'm always open to more information, and I'm always open to change it as more information comes, as things come in and make more sense. So I think that that's something really awesome about him, and I think that's really awesome about a lot of people we get to talk to, and we need to hopefully teach people that having a conversation isn't about trying to win a debate or win an argument. It's about trying to learn from it. And that's the beautiful thing about these podcasts, is that I'm sure you've grown a lot doing yours, and you've done a lot more than I've done. And I know just from the whatever episode 27 this is, even though I've had many of hours, you've had many more hours of talking with people. So I've grown a lot. I could just imagine how much you've grown and learned just doing this. Would you find that to be true? Just having the conversation, how much you can take from it, and this whole thing's become a learning experience and a growing experience that I probably didn't think was really going to happen. So did you find that to be true also?
Absolutely. I think none of us are the finished product, are we? We're always evolving. We're always changing, questioning our opinions. I think that's healthy. I think it's part of being human. I would hope that 5 years from now, if I listen to this conversation that we're having, that there'll probably be a couple of things that I'm more informed about, or things that maybe I've changed my perspective on. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think fixing yourself to one particular worldview or viewpoint about a particular subject is very limiting, and if you come across evidence that kind of leads you to believe something else, I think as long as you're open about it and honest about it, that's just part of the process. But absolutely, from doing as many podcasts as I have over the last couple of years, I've seen some changes, within myself, and particularly the way that I approach things. I think the challenge, and you might have experienced this as well, Ricky, the challenge is always trying to represent yourself in the most accurate way possible, because as you kind of alluded to earlier, there is a kind of self-conscious thing that kicks in when you know that you're being recorded, and when you know that what you're saying now will be here forever. People can listen to this tomorrow, they can listen to it a week from now, a month from now, 10 years from now. So I think the challenge is always trying to represent yourself, as I said, in the most accurate way that you can, not straying too far from what you truly believe, and not being too influenced by the people that you're talking to, basically staying true to yourself. And I think the more that you do it, the more comfortable you get, as with anything else. And that's certainly something that I found as well. But I guarantee that when you look back and you listen to your old shows, maybe even now, you'll probably see that, oh, I can't believe that I articulated this in this way, or I can't believe I held, this particular viewpoint. But I don't think that's anything to be afraid of. That's something to celebrate, and it shows that you're growing, and shows that you're kind of changing and getting better as a person.
Oh, you are completely correct, because I have a hard time listening to old shows, because I have such a hard time starting podcasts, especially in the beginning. Like I love the conversation part of the podcast, but it's hard to do the whole welcome to the Ripple Effect podcast, this is my guest, when I'm just like, I know this person, I just want to talk to them, and I'm just like, I just want to record. But it's like, you have to obviously introduce them, and so not everybody listening knows who I'm talking to, so it's just there's certain things you have to do. So then it's hard to get in that zone where you're just like, I'm just talking now, I'm not focused on the introduction, I'm not focused on what topic I want to open up with. I'm just talking, and even a couple the shows that I had that I don't know if you've had this experience. It seems like you haven't, because I'll tell you, even listening to some of your old shows, I remember before I even started my podcast, when some of your earlier shows that I was listening to, you always did a great job of interviewing people and getting your thoughts across. I fucking sucked. I remember when I had James Corbett on, he showed up on the computer on Skype, and I'm just like, holy fuck, that's James Corbett. And I'm like, it's almost like I don't know what I expected, but it was just like all of a sudden he was there. I'm like, holy shit, we're doing this. I'm like, I'm gonna actually have a guest on my show. And then so the first part of that show, I was just like stunned, and then I was just like didn't know, so it took a while to get comfortable. I think that one thing that I'm trying to do a better job of doing is letting, like you said, let my character come out, be who I am. And usually it comes out later in shows. Like the first, I don't know, 20 minutes, I'll be a little, not uptight, but a little more gun shy. And then as I get more comfortable, I'm like, fuck it, just enjoy myself, do what I always do, and that's talk to people that I love listening to also talk and have a great conversation and just let it flow and don't think so much of it. But in the back of your head, there's sometimes you remember, holy shit, if I say this, it's gonna be online for a really really long time, and so that's gonna scare you a little bit. So it's hard to kind of balance it out, because obviously if we're just talking before we record, if I say something stupid, I don't have to worry about anybody hearing it. I can correct myself, or you might know what I mean, but somebody might listen to it and not know what I mean. So it's just, it definitely is, as much as you want to capture. And I think, you do a good job with it. And I'm definitely getting better at it, where, I'm capturing. There's definitely certain guests too that I feel like I'm way more comfortable with. Like talking to you, I remember I had, Dr. Gregory A. Smith from the movie American Addict on, and talking to him, there's certain guests that I was real comfortable. Oh, Ben Bolden from Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, that show, and I like certain guests were just really they were so easy to talk to. I remember when I was so glad you were one of my first guests, because I remember I think I even emailed you and told you, I'm like, oh, I was so comfortable talking to you. It was an awesome conversation, and I really meant that, because it was just like it was one of the first podcasts that I really felt comfortable, and I got lost in the conversation. I didn't really, and I know that has to do with you, is the fact that you're easy to talk to, and having a conversation really is a talent. Like, people don't realize that not everybody, some people love talking, but some people love conversation. One type of person waits for their turn to talk. The other type of person actually listens, and at times contributes to what the other person is saying. So it definitely is a talent. Did you ever feel a transition? Was there an episode where you're like, okay, I got it, like now I'm 100% comfortable, or did you never really stumble and have those first guest jitters?
It's a good question. I think looking back, and to be honest, I don't really listen to old shows for the same reason that you mentioned, just because you're paranoid that you're gonna hear something that you don't like or kind of cringe at something. I think probably, I would say around 6 or 8 months ago, whenever that was, probably when I was up to like episode 90, 100, something like that. I think that's when I started to get very comfortable with it, and I was really being myself on the mic, because that is something that you only get with repetition. Because as much as you think that you're being unique when you start out, subconsciously you are mirroring a lot of things that people that you admire do, and you have certain kind of role models in mind. I think whenever you start anything and you end up sounding like them a little bit, you end up talking about the same topics as them, that type of thing. So I think I'd like to think that I didn't do that too much. I like to think that all the shows from the very start were good, but I definitely think that, as I said, about half a year ago or so, there was a definite step up in quality. And I think, again, it's something that the listeners have to understand as well, and keep in context, and keep perspective on, which is, if you're someone who is producing, whether it's a daily podcast or a weekly podcast or even a monthly podcast, if you're producing hours and hours of audio, which is unscripted off the top of your head for the most part, there are going to be slip-ups, there are going to be mistakes, there are going to be things that you as a listener don't agree necessarily with. And that's something that the listeners have to understand as well, is this art form is not about reading a teleprompter. There's not a producer giving you a list of bullet points to hit on in the next segment. It's really the most natural form of conversation you can have. So the listeners have to understand that, and from the perspective of the people doing it, you hit the nail on the head. Really, you've got to lose yourself in the process. You can't be conscious of what you're doing. You've just got to kind of imagine that you're having a conversation with someone, and whatever happens after that point.
Yeah, it's kind of just like those days, Guy, when you were crossing people over in Wales. You just got to lose yourself in the game. Just that, you know,
exactly.
You have your best games when you're just, you know, you're not overthinking and you're just playing and you're lost in the game, or somebody elbowed you, so you're upset, and now you're just making moves and you're just playing and you're not thinking about, you know, you're not overthinking things. So I mean, having a conversation is pretty similar, you know, and so it's like you said, you just have to lose yourself, and really just. It sucks because if you do say something stupid, it does, you know, you basically have a record of it. But, you know, the only way to get, you know, capture a good conversation and a real natural conversation is kind of losing yourself and just being yourself. But I do agree with you that I think even with myself, like I was really influenced by podcasts like yours and Rogan's and Dan Carlin's. And so I think that it's almost like playing music. Like when I first started playing guitar, like I adopted bands that I like their style, you know, and I think as you grow, you end up creating your own style, but I think it's almost because obviously we're all influenced by somebody. That when we get into something, we're influenced by someone, so you're going to see hints of those people you're influenced by, you know, and I think that's all right too. And I think that's you know, it's a good thing, because it just means, you know, those are people you're fans of. It's hard. I mean, it's no different than, you know, you have a group of friends you're always hanging out with, and then you all start sounding alike, or you use the same jokes or use the same slogans, you know. So it just I think it's one of those things. And as we grow, I think that we kind of create our own platform. I mean, I remember at one time I'm like, holy shit, man. I'm like, I hope Rogan obviously Rogan doesn't know of my podcast, but I'm like, I hope podcasts like Rogan and Smells Like Human Spirit podcast doesn't think that I'm just taking all, you know, the same guests as they have, because it's just like we're all into like the same type of things. So it was just like you see people on your show, and then you see people on Rogan's show, then you know, some of the same people like Daniele Bagnelli, who's done all three shows, and Dan Carlin, and you know, and people like that, and Lee Camp, and so it was just like, you know, I'm like, you know what, we just we're similar people, and that's why we all enjoy each other's work, you know, and that's what it is, you know, and we all have you know, we're all interested in the same type of topics, and usually that means that we're interested in the same type of people. So but you know, it was definitely in the back of my mind. I'm like, you know, it's I hope there's enough fans out there that will to listen to all these shows, because I think that everybody does bring something different. Even though all these guests, we've had some of the similar guests like Douglas Ruskoff and stuff like that, and some of the other ones I mentioned, we do all bring something different. You know, you have your perspectives, I have my perspective, Rogan has his perspectives, and I think that hopefully people find enjoyment in the things we have in common, but also the things that we're very different in, you know, our backgrounds and our other interests and stuff. So did you ever think about that? Just, you know, the guests that you're having on and booking them, and you know, maybe straying away from some that have done a lot of podcasts or whatnot. Do you ever think about those type of things, or you just say, hey, I'm just going to pick people I like and not really worry about it?
Yeah, I think the perspective that you've got to have, or the mindset you've got to have, is that no one can do you better than you. And so while there may be similarities between what you're doing and someone else is doing, while there may be guests that overlap or topics that overlap, at the end of the day, as long as you're being yourself, it doesn't matter. But certainly I've tried to have more and more content which is sort of, you know, straying away from so many interviews. I like to, of course, I love to interview people. I love to have guests on the show, but at the same time, you know, I want to have episodes where I'm exploring a topic on my own, where I'm doing something that perhaps people won't get somewhere else, because I do think it is important to kind of differentiate yourself from what everyone else is doing. Because, yeah, if everyone was approaching things in exactly the same way, talking to the same people, you get to a point of oversaturation where no one's going to listen anymore, because, you know, they're hearing the same thing everywhere they go. And I think to a certain extent, that's, you know, you listen to some podcasts, and that is already kind of happening. So yeah, you just got to realize that you can't really try to be better or worry that you're going to be worse than what everyone else is doing. You've just got to be different. You've just got to be yourself, and let the chips fall where they may. But the good news is, we talked at the start of the interview about so many people still aren't aware of podcasts. The good news is a lot of people are, and if you've got something to say, you will find an audience, or rather the audience will find you. So I think that's something anyone producing any sort of independent media should keep in mind.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, and I think that you do a great job on your. I remember the first one that I think one of the ones that really got my attention was the income equality episode you did, and it was one of my favorite episodes because when you do, when you're basically the host and you're doing an interview, you really don't have as much time to really focus on your own opinions, and so it was awesome to hear you do a whole show based on your own opinions on a topic, and that was really cool. And I know that you're doing some more crazy shit because now you're doing a daily podcast, and now I believe you're doing a live podcast soon, which is crazy. So I remember we talked about it before we went on the air, how I'm like, how the fuck is Guy ever gonna pull off a daily podcast? I'm like, this is insanity. I'm like, there's no way he can possibly do this. I'm like, and then like now you've been doing it for a while, and it seems like it's going good. I don't know how you find time for anything, but how is it working out? You enjoying doing a daily podcast? Do you have any regrets? Like, holy shit, I told everybody I did a daily podcast. There's no taking that back now, or have you found a way to kind of balance it all out?
It's an interesting question. I think, for full disclosure, I have had to take a couple of short breaks from doing it as well. I'm actually in the midst of one right now where, sometimes, for lack of a better way of putting it, real life intervenes and you have a lot going on in your personal, professional life, and the podcast has to go to the back burner, unfortunately, for a few days or for a week. And I've had to do that a couple of times this year. But yeah, you're right. For the most part, I've been able to sustain it. It's been about 3.5 months now doing a daily show. And yeah, I think it is a pretty crazy idea. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to everyone. But I think it was just kind of spurred by my desire to get more content out there. And there are pluses and minuses. I mean, the good part about it clearly is when you have a regular schedule of putting out shows, it's something people can set their watch to, something people can look forward to. It becomes part of their daily routine. If you're doing a weekly show that comes out on a Friday or Sunday, it becomes part of their weekly routine and so on. But then there is that expectation, as you alluded to there, that once you kind of make that commitment, perhaps you've got to stick to it. But I think as long as you're honest with the audience, as long as you let your listeners know what the state of affairs is, I think that's really the key. I'd like to think that I can continue to sustain this as long as humanly possible. But there's also a great advantage with having a show that doesn't have a consistent publishing schedule, like I know yours does or doesn't, rather.
Yeah.
Because then you build up that goodwill of people are visiting your website and, oh, there's 2 new Ripple Effect podcasts. This is great. I didn't anticipate this. But at the same time, they're not disappointed when they go on the website and nothing's there because there's no expectation for that. So you can make an argument for either. I found personally it's been great for me. The number of people who are exposed to my podcast has gone through the roof in the last 3 months. Been able to meet and talk to some very interesting people. And it's also a personal challenge as well to try to continue to produce interesting and relevant stuff on a daily basis. You have to be very organized, obviously very motivated. We might have this conversation 6 months from now and I might be on the brink of despair, but at the moment, I'm keeping it together.
Yeah, or you might be alcoholic, or one of the two. But that might actually make for some good shows. A couple having a couple drinks during a show, and you're like, fuck it, I'll record my podcast today. But yeah, which could be dangerous. If you want to talk about having to live with a podcast, imagine that, drunk, just putting it out there, and then listening the next day, like, holy shit, this is just taking drunk texting to another level.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's someone probably doing that. There's enough podcasts out there. There's probably someone doing it.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing I want to talk to you about real quick. I don't know how tight we are with time, how much more time you have, but I want to hit on two podcasts you've done that if people haven't checked out, check out. I've talked to a lot of people about them because I think they're super interesting, and they're two guests that I haven't seen on any the other podcasts I listen to, and that's Abraham Bolden and Edward Bernays' daughter. And the Abraham Bolden one's really interesting because I'm actually going to have John Hankey on, who did The Dark Legacy, and the movie about the JFK murder and the connection with the Bush family and stuff like that. And he's one that, you know, I haven't heard him talk about Abraham Bolden. I've had Roger Stone on, who wrote the book They Killed or I forget what the hell it's called. It's the one about LBJ, linking LBJ to the JFK murder. And Roger Stone was the political consultant. He worked under Nixon and whatnot. And he never talked about Abraham Bolden. It's amazing how his story is not as familiar to a lot of people who talk about the JFK assassination as you would think. And why do you think that is? Because you had the opportunity to talk to him. I mean, why do you think that people aren't jumping on this story? Because I mean, I think it's explosive what he has to say, and the fact that he got locked up and his whole story.
I'm not entirely sure. I think from what I can see, he's certainly not someone who has done every interview under the sun. I mean, if you try to find media appearances from him in the past, they're few and far between, at least from what I can find. So I don't think he's as well publicized or as well known in comparison to a lot of other people who have something to say about the subject. But as you mentioned, he certainly has a lot to say. He was a former Secret Service agent, attempted to go to the Warren Commission with some evidence about previous assassination plot that wasn't really dealt with, wasn't really taken seriously about a month before the president died, and subsequently was kind of caught up on some, well, I think it's safe to say, bogus bribery charges and went to prison. And he's written a book about this, The Echo from Dealey Plaza. He's not just done my show, but some other radio shows as well. But I think it's a combination of, for whatever reason, he is not as out there as some other characters who have something to say about it. I don't know why. I think it's that. And also, like a lot of things, unfortunately, the whole JFK saga, I think, is year by year kind of fading from historical memory. I think in our society, we have a kind of historical amnesia. And after a certain period of time, people don't want to hear about it anymore. And perhaps to some people, what he says now is no longer relevant. It's no longer pertinent. I think we're already seeing that to a certain extent with 9/11. I know I have friends who've told me that they've tried to engage in a conversation with someone about 9/11, and some people will roll their eyes and say, come on, that was 2001, that was 13 years ago, it's time to move on. We don't want to talk about it anymore. You're a 9/11 truther and all that type of stuff. So I think we have a problem with, we forget some of these things and we forget how important they really are. But I'm sure I'll talk to Abraham again. Hopefully I have the privilege to, and that's something that I'll put to him. I'll ask him why his story isn't as well known. Personally, I find him to be very credible, very well spoken, very well informed. I don't particularly see any real holes in his story. So yeah, it's a bit of a mystery to me too.
Yeah, and I haven't seen anybody come out saying that he's full of shit or anything. And I mean, he was. We talked about one of the first topics was talking about race and racism and stuff. He was one of the first black Secret Service agents, wasn't he? Or one of the first ones on a President Detail, I believe.
I think he was in fact the first African American Secret Service agent on the White House detail. I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty amazing, And so I mean, to think that this guy was obviously went through a background search or check and has to be a pretty decent person to be put on that detail. And so it's not like you're dealing with some type of a guy who's just making up a story. So it's just
right.
Yeah. It's really interesting because it's a really interesting story. If people haven't checked it out, look up Guy Evans's podcast. Just look up Abraham Bolden. You'll find it, and it's a really interesting story. And it's probably a perspective of the JFK assassination that you probably haven't seen. Unfortunately, like you said, Guy, I think that people are just so sick of hearing about it. Like there's so many stories and there's so many different details that people are like, yeah, okay, yeah, I've heard it already. Yeah, I get it. They killed him. No, and it's like you get one of the two things. You either get the people who don't want to talk about it because they've already come to the conclusion that, yeah, okay, he was killed by CIA, FBI, whatever, and or you get the people who are like, no, it was Oswald. You're insane, this and that. So just like either way, a lot of people just kind of dismiss it, and they've already come had their conclusion on what they think happened, and they don't want to talk about it anymore. But it's such a complex story because I mean I've done a lot of research on it, and I've read a lot and watched a lot of documentaries on it, and it's just it's almost endless the things you can find on it, and it just it's kind of sucks that, like you said, the conversation even on the 50th anniversary, it didn't spark as much conversation about it as I expected last year, and I expected it to blow up. I mean, obviously some books came out and stuff like that, but nothing huge. Nothing really blew up, or there was no protesting to release some of the documents that are still classified or anything like that. So it just it seems crazy because if you look at American history, I would say 9/11 and the JFK assassination are, if not, they're at least two of the biggest events in American history.
Absolutely. And, as I said, I think that's one of the problems that we have is we don't really appreciate sometimes how important these things were and how they changed not just America, but the world at large as well. And the impact of them kind of in some respect lessens over time. I wonder whether the same case will be with 9/11 when it's the 50th anniversary. Will people remember just, I mean, for me, for people my age, that was our JFK assassination in a way. That was the thing that shook the earth to its core. That was something where you can definitively say that the world was different on September the 10th, 2011 to what it was on September the 12th. There were huge ramifications, which we're still feeling now, and we probably will be for a long time. But yeah, I think you're right. It's either that some people get so locked into a viewpoint that they don't want to hear anything that contradicts it, or I think some people just get to a point where they're just tapped out. They just reach a point of fatigue, and they've heard all of the various theories and all the various viewpoints and discussions, and they don't have time for it anymore. But yeah, as you said, people can listen to my interview with Abraham for themselves and make up your own mind. To me, seems like a very credible voice, and it's definitely a story that we should add to the equation when we try to figure out what the heck actually happened that day.
Yeah, definitely. And now another really interesting podcast was Edward Bernays' daughter, which is insane because he's probably somebody that gets brought up a lot on this podcast, and similar to your podcast, you did a whole series on him because I think he's so influential to policy and social engineering and marketing, and basically how they sell us a theme or idea, and a lot of people don't know who he is. And when I found out that you're doing a podcast, or when it came out and you did a podcast with his daughter, I'm like, this is fucking crazy. I didn't even know she was still alive. And I mean, I didn't even think that the idea of maybe having a conversation with one of his kids, and if they were still alive, and just really interesting how she looked at him. And what did you get from that? It seem like, I mean, this is just from my perspective. I listened to it a while ago because it did come out quite a bit ago. So my memory is kind of vague, but I do remember the feeling I got listening to it, and it didn't seem like she looked at him like a evil person, and it made me wonder, like, did he, are we painting this picture of this evil person? Did he, was his intentions not necessarily evil? What did you get from it?
It's a very good question and a very interesting one. Well, I think to many people, the first time they were exposed to Edward Bernays and what he stood for was the film Century of the Self that was put out by the BBC, and that film is actually about 12 years old. But
Adam Curtis?
That's right. But I think for whatever reason, in the last 5-6 years, maybe in the YouTube age and all that type of stuff, it's kind of resurfaced and reemerged as a documentary that a lot of people cite. And while it's a very good documentary, I think it's also presents a very black and white picture of who this man actually was. And as as his daughter Anne kind of talked about in our interview, it almost portrays him as like the second coming of Hitler. You know, this was one of the worst men of the 20th century. And I think while there's no doubt that a lot of what he did was very detrimental and injurious to the whole concept of democracy and people making informed choices for themselves and so on, you know, again, I'm not defending, you know, what he did or what he stood for in any way, shape or form, but I don't think it's as simple as that. And I think it is important to talk to people who maybe have a different perspective. Clearly, you can argue that his daughter is going to have some very obvious and inherent bias talking about her father. But the intriguing thing is she's not completely defensive of her father. In fact, she's gone on record in public statements before and on my podcast as being very critical of him, not just what he did publicly, but also who he was privately as well. But overall, I think she did give us a balanced idea of who he was. He wasn't the devil, but he was someone who was absolutely obsessed with his work to the detriment of his marriage and his relationship with her. He did believe, for whatever reason, that the majority of people were stupid and therefore needed the guidance of the intelligent few, as Walter Lippmann put it, and as he kind of adopted. They needed that guidance in order to do anything and make decisions. And he believed the very important decisions should be made by very, select handful of people in society. So absolutely, he did definitely possess all of those views. But at the same time, as she said, there was a side to him that was that didn't reflect that. He was good around children, for example, something seemingly as random as that. He was, known for being a good person around the people that he worked with in some circles. So I think no human being is ever, with some very obvious exceptions. I mean, there have been, there's people who are born with, genetic, psychological disorders, and there are truly evil people that do exist and have existed, and we can all think of many off the top of our head, but I'm not convinced whether Edward Bernays falls into that category. I just kind of see him as a man who was so obsessed with his work and so obsessed with his mission that it didn't really matter who he stepped on. It didn't really matter what happened to society in general. He was going to follow his beliefs as far as it would take him. But I definitely respect his daughter, Anne, for being able to be as objective as possible. Again, clearly her views are going to be tainted somewhat because she grew up with the man in the house. But I think if you listen to it, she is very fair with how she looks at him. And just as my last point, again, I know I'm rambling here, but she actually talks about that film, Century of the Self, and she claims, and again, he's not here to defend himself, so who knows whether this is entirely true, but she claims that Adam Curtis, the filmmaker, was very, very sort of obvious in his agenda making that film, and when he interviewed her, would ask her to rephrase her answers time and time again to kind of get the sound bites that he wanted. And we don't have the raw footage to look at and evaluate whether that's true, but we definitely have to consider that when watching it. And like anything else, it's certainly a very complex picture.
Yeah, it's funny that that you bring up that movie, and Adam Curtis was brought up a bunch of times on my show. I had the journalists from Truth Loaders from the UK, and they brought up Adam Curtis, and I had Pete McGrain, who did the movie Ethos with Woody Harrelson. He brought up Adam Curtis, and so I actually just got the DVD set in today with all his films. I believe they're all it's like 4 or 5 of them. I'm guessing it's from the BBC documentaries that he did. And anyone that you recommend? Did you watch all those? Is there one I should watch first?
As far as Adam Curtis documentaries, you know what? I to be completely honest with you, I'm not too familiar with his other stuff that he's done, so I can't really speak to that.
Is he really popular in the UK? Because it seems like a lot of people who are from not America know of him, and like me, being raised in the U.S., like I was surprised how many people were influenced by this guy and how little I knew about him.
I mean, again, from my experience, I don't think so. He's certainly not a household name. I think it's safe to say, as far as people, as much as someone can be, someone who makes documentaries and makes films. But I think, obviously, being associated with the BBC, I'm sure he has quite a lot of notoriety. But my first exposure to him was that series, The Century of the Self, and again, he's not here to kind of give us, what would be really interesting is if we could hear what Anne has to say, Edward Bernays' daughter Anne, if we could hear what he has to say, and then we could really make a sound judgment. But I don't know. But as far as whether he's this really popular filmmaker, again, from my perspective, I don't think so.
Yeah. He just been brought up. Like I said, about a few guests have brought him up and talked about how he was a real influence on them. Like I said, Truth Loaders and Pete McGrain, and I'm just like I briefly heard the name, but I didn't know him that well. So, but again, I'm talking to people who are from the UK and are in alternative media. So I'm maybe talking to just the type of people that would be his fans. But to get back to Edward Bernays, it was weird because I always thought, I'm like, is he the type of guy, like the guy who created the gun, who came up with the gun isn't necessarily evil. The guy who created the bomb, isn't necessarily evil. The people who created it, but people can use their what they create for evil. And it always made me wonder about Edward Bernays. Did he just he created public relations and propaganda and all these things, and were people just using it for evil, or did he want to use it for evil? And sorry, go ahead. No, that was basically it. I was just I was trying to think how else to word it, just in case I didn't get my question out correctly. But
sure. I mean, the one word that always came up in my interview with Anne was contradiction. He was certainly a walking contradiction. You look at one of the things he was involved with, which he's most famous for or infamous for, is the Torches of Freedom publicity stunt, where he got the debutantes to light up during the Easter Day parade and make this statement apparently about women's equality, but really it was a thinly veiled stunt for cigarettes for a particular firm or a particular company. But at the same time, while he was involved in doing that, he was very much against his wife smoking in the home, and he would, react in horror if she was actually smoking. So here's a man on one hand is promoting smoking, but on the other hand, doesn't want his wife or anyone associated with him to be involved in it. And if you listen to the interview, there are other instances that she cites as well, just showing what a conflicted and, as I said, contradicted personality he was. And that's why it's really hard for me to say whether he's definitively evil or not. I mean, going back to the smoking thing, late in his life, it's said by many, and Anne couldn't confirm this, she didn't remember, but it's said that he almost became a bit of an activist against smoking and speaking out about how bad it could injure people's health. And maybe that was guilt setting in at an older age. Maybe he realized that he had to right some of the wrongs. But I just think he was an elitist. He was arrogant. He had no time, no energy to listen to the people, what he would call regular people or average people. We forget sometimes he was the nephew of Freud, so he clearly had a very adept understanding of what makes people tick, and he had a very insightful understanding of kind of the hive mind or the masses, and what you can do to mislead people and persuade people to do certain things. So he was a genius in his field. People can call him an evil genius, but he certainly was a genius at public relations and propaganda. What he chose to do with that genius, I think you can say without a doubt, probably did more harm than good. But it's a very interesting debate to get into, whether he was the evil villain that he was portrayed as in Century of the Self, because they don't really give you the other side of the coin when it comes to that movie.
Yeah, it definitely is interesting, and it makes you wonder if like you said, he was just obsessed with his work, and maybe there's people higher ups, politicians or people in marketing who just looked at taking this his research and say, hey, we can use this, or so who knows, maybe that could be the case, and maybe he wasn't as but sometimes that's what happens with big corporations, in the same case with big corporations, you see, this person handles marketing, this person handles, different things in the company, and we look at Monsanto, we look at one big corporation as this big evil villain, when really there's just all these people that are doing their little part, and it's not just one big person making all these bad decisions. It's just all these people their little decisions combine to make a bunch of bad, one bad evil company, So and I think at times you don't even realize that you're a part of this money hungry machine that's just maybe doing things that aren't morally right. So I wonder if it's one of those things. So I know we briefly, whatever happened, didn't you last time you were on the show, you said you're possibly going to do something about the royal family. You ever end up doing anything about the royal family?
That was the plan at the time. I really wanted to do a series just examining basically the existence of the British royal family specifically, because that's a topic that I'm pretty interested in, and I've never really done a show about it. I may have asked people about it in the past, and I did start doing that, went down that road, and then made the crazy decision to do a daily podcast. So I think at some point in the future, I'll definitely see if I can get that out there. But I want to make sure it's pretty comprehensive, and I want to make sure that I'm being fair as much as I can, because I do have a quite strong opinion about that, and looking at both sides of the argument. So hopefully, in the future that will come about.
Yeah. In the UK, that's I know I've had people mention how classes it seems to be a bigger deal there than here. Is that true?
I think so. I've kind of always looked at, again, this is just my perspective. I've always kind of looked at the biggest societal problem in the UK being class, and in the US race. And I may or may not be correct on that one, but I do think that there is a very sort of classism still exists, I'll put it that way. And you can look at the demonization of the working class in Britain, the labeling of I'm not so sure if you come across this term before, chavs and people like that. There's a great book written by a guy named Owen Jones, columnist and author, who talks about this whole phenomena of the way that the working class people are portrayed in Britain in the media and things like that. And to me, it's just absurd that in 2014, we still have a royal family. We still have an unelected head of state. It's just, we talked a little bit earlier in the podcast about all the progress that we've made as people. And that's something, to me, it's just a complete product of a different era. And it's very symbolic, I think, of some of the problems in the UK, that there is that sort of mentality that still exists, that we have the divine right to rule the people because of what family we were born into. And I find it very ironic when, I'm not sure if you know, the Queen does a Christmas speech or Christmas message that's televised every Christmas Day in the afternoon at about 4 p.m., I think. And I remember one year watching that for some reason. And, she's talking about there's no place for discrimination in the country and we're all equal, something like that, something along those terms. And to me, the whole concept of a royal family is just discrimination at its core. It's the idea that we have, royal blood that goes through our veins, and therefore we're better than you, and we're better than most of the people living in this country, and we deserve to live in a palace and earn all this money for doing, nothing, contributing nothing really to society. And I know there are apologists out there who will say, the Queen has a very busy speaking tour and she goes all over the world representing the country and all that type of stuff. And I've always kind of been of the opinion that as much as the royal family may help tourism, and I'm sure it's a big appeal of visiting the UK for many people, especially people from the States, from what I've encountered, I don't see why we can't just simply keep the palace for people to view, keep some of these things that people can still enjoy as part of the experience, but move past this idea of an unelected head of state, because it's just so hypocritical to tell people that they can be whatever they want to be and everyone's equal and everyone in this country has the same chance of success, while at the same time your very existence as a royal family completely goes against that notion. So I think it all starts at the top as far as classism, and the royal family is a perfect example of that.
When you said, I don't think but the Queen, I thought you were going to say has a podcast.
Yeah, coming. Coming this summer, the Queen's
like,
podcast.
I'm like, now podcasting has gone too far. If the Queen has
Yeah.
podcast, the worst part it'd be the UK's taxpayers paying for that, because that's the worst part, is that you guys pay for all that crap, right? Or the people who live there.
Well, that's true. And again, there are people who will make the argument that it actually works out to about 50 pence per citizen, so less than $1, or around about $1 each per year. But from my perspective, I don't care if it costs £10 a year, 50p, £100. The point is, I think people should be able to choose whether they want to contribute to this family or not. So it's not how much it costs. It's about the choice. It's about living in a free society, living in a democratic one. Now, if there was some sort of referendum or some sort of public vote about, do we want to continue to support the royal family, and 51% of the public voted yes, then I guess I would have to say fair enough. That's what people want. And there are opinion polls that suggest that the majority of people are still very happy with the royal family and don't see anything wrong with it. But for me, we should at least, and I say we, I'm no longer there, but I think the country as a whole should have some sort of serious discussion and debate about it at the very least. But it seems like, I remember at the turn of the millennium, there were a couple of books that came out, and some magazine and newspaper articles, and people like Christopher Hitchens was openly questioning whether we should have a royal family or not. But it seems like that's really kind of dissipated over the last few years, and I think the majority of the public are very happy with the way things are. They've never stepped outside the box and questioned whether there's a better way or whether we need to have it. But I feel a little bit embarrassed that the UK still has that system, because while it's definitely a source of intrigue and interest for a lot of people, it's also a bit of a joke as well. That's something that I've encountered. People find it a bit humorous that here we are in 2014 and we still have a queen and all that type of stuff. So, it's definitely something there should be an open debate about at the very least.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. In 2014, the fact that these people they convince everybody they're privileged because of their bloodline, because of the family they're born into, is completely insane. I think that one thing we've learned about talking about Edward Bernays is that you can convince the public of things. So even though we have a poll and there's people agreeing that maybe they're not completely against it, if we grow up in that, that being normal, having a queen, it's going to feel very normal, and it's going to, I'm sure there's going to be some people who just think that it's, it's the way things should be. And it's it's all about traditions and history and stuff like that. And, but I'll tell you, that type of stuff is what, the bloodline thing is what makes me, I don't know if you've ever read the book by John King, Princess Diana, The Evidence, or watched the documentary Unlawful Killing, but they're both about Princess Diana and her death, and that's a big part of it was a bloodline, and the fact that she was dating some guy who was Muslim, and some people say that she was pregnant with a child, and I don't, of course I don't know if it's true or not. I do know that she did write a letter saying that they're trying to kill her or something along those lines, and so I mean there's definitely a lot of holes in that whole story, and I would recommend either one of those, that book and that documentary, but when you look at bloodlines, it doesn't seem too far-fetched, the idea that even if that wasn't the case in Princess Diana's story, if that were to happen in the future, where somebody from the royal family did end up getting pregnant with somebody else's, somebody who's not a part of that bloodline or of a different nationality or different race, it wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that the bloodline is more important than a sibling or family member's life. So it doesn't seem too far-fetched.
Yeah, I think the Diana thing, I remember the day that it happened, and it was just, the whole country was in mourning for a few days. Actually, it was just non-stop, wall-to-wall coverage. Nothing else on TV but coverage of her funeral and everything that happened. And I don't know what happened. I kind of lean towards, I hesitate to use this term, but the official narrative that she probably was it probably was a car accident caused by the harassment of the paparazzi and things like that. But again, I've got an open mind towards it, and if I come across something that changes my mind, then that could happen. But I think it's, going through it at the time, there was this compulsion to be sad, and by all accounts, she was. I'm Welsh. She was the Princess of Wales. Of course, that's not something the people of Wales gave to her. That's a title that was given to her. But by all accounts, she did do a lot for charity, and she was very empathetic and a noble person who did kind of question the whole power structure and didn't really see herself as being the same as the other royals. And there was this publicized rift between her and the Queen and all that type of stuff. So, taking all that into account, it was sad that she died, but it was odd. I even remember at the time, being much younger, there was this weird compulsion that you had to be sad. And it's such a bizarre thing that someone you've never met before, someone who really, whether, it sounds harsh, but whether they live or die has very little effect on your quality of life or your family's quality of life. There's this, you're almost forced to grieve for this person. And I mentioned Christopher Hitchens before. People can go on YouTube and you can find footage of him admonishing people outside Buckingham Palace a week or two after she died, just telling them to basically get on with their lives and, stop being so upset about it, because there's a lot of truth to that. Sometimes we'll get more upset over the death of some highly publicized figure than someone in our actual lives. So even as a much younger person, I remember thinking this is very strange, this whole thing. I think she may have come to where I grew up at one point in time when I was very little. I certainly remember meeting I can't even remember his name now, William and Harry, and I just remember thinking this is so strange. There's women crying and curtsying and men bowing their heads, and it is just so bizarre. It's so strange how we all kind of buy into this. But like you said before, a lot of people think that, hey, it's tradition, it's history, and we should respect it. So it is what it is.
Yeah, but one thing about traditions is that I think we should rethink them. It's start your own traditions. We should never do things just because a bunch of people behind us did it. So
yeah.
But hey, Guy, I don't want to hold you up too much. You're on your vacation, and obviously the last thing you want to do on your vacation away from podcasts is do a whole day of podcasting. So enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for being with me, and it's awesome to have you back. And hopefully we can keep this going, and maybe a little down the line we'll talk again, and and keep updating each other with our shows, and hopefully we keep going, and hopefully all the other podcasters don't have the endurance that we have to keep going, and so it's awesome. I'm looking forward to inform my listeners about your live podcast real quick before I let you go. You're doing one, I believe it's coming up in May, right? It's not too far ahead, right?
That's correct. And before I go into that, Ricky, let me just say it's been great being on the show again. I've just looked at the clock and I can't believe we've been going at it for nearly 2 hours now. But I think that speaks to how well you do this thing. You, from listening to your other shows, you make your guests feel very comfortable, and you don't interrupt people. You let them say their piece, and it makes for a very natural and very sort of pleasant listening experience. So first of all, it's been a pleasure being back on the show, and anytime you want to have me, I'll certainly try to make myself available. But going back to your point, yes, we have a live show coming up on the podcast. It's actually to mark the 2-year anniversary of the first show. It's on May the 7th, which I'm not sure when this is coming out, Ricky, but I'm sure it'll be before then.
Yeah.
So it's Wednesday, May the 7th at 9 p.m. Eastern. And the best thing that I can sort of advise people to do is go to smellslikehumanspirit.com. And probably in a couple of days, I'll be updating that with all the information. But if you go to that website on May the 7th, you'll find all the information as far as how to call in, how to listen to the show. And right now, the tentative topic that we're going to talk about is technology and the future. Basically, some of the pitfalls, perhaps with all of the technological advancements that we've seen in recent times, maybe what could go wrong in the future, what could be beneficial to us. It's just going to be a really sort of general and open discussion for people to call in and contribute to. So, you know, I certainly need to get my butt in gear and start letting my listeners know a little bit more about it. But I appreciate you giving me the floor to let your listeners know as well. So it's Wednesday, May the 7th, 9 p.m. Eastern. If they go to smellsLikeHumanSpirit.com, the number will be there, and they can call in and be part of the show.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's gonna, you know, the cool thing is you're always finding new ways to kind of you know, do things a little different. And you know, you did your daily podcast, now you're doing the live thing, and so I think that's awesome. And definitely check it out. If you guys listen to this on iTunes or Stitcher, wherever, you won't find it there. But if you go to our YouTube channel, underneath all our episodes on YouTube, I put the links to our guests' website, so you can find it there if you want to find that. And so, you know, definitely check him out. He's, you know, I consider him a friend. And I think when you sit down, I know you said that, you know, it was hard for you to say that you really knew Michael Ruppert. But, you know, maybe it's just me. But when I sit down and talk to people for, you know, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, I definitely feel like, you know, I get to know them. And maybe it's just from my perspective, I definitely feel like, you know, I'm making friends on this journey. So I think that's awesome. And hopefully, like you said, we keep doing this. And then thanks for the kind words about the show. And you know, it feels like a reunion tour, because I have Corbett coming this Sunday. So it's cool to have you guys both back. I wanted to, you know, two people that I wanted to have back was you and him. I was really excited about having back, and Daniele actually also, who's coming up, I think sometime in May. Just because, you know, I couldn't thank you guys enough for being on and taking the chance. And I've even thought about me in your position. I'm like, would I go on, you know, would I go on my podcast if, you know, if I was like 4 episodes in and, you know, and didn't know what the fuck I was doing, you know. So it says something about you guys and how awesome you guys are and how nice you are. So I can't thank you guys enough for, you know, for being one of my first guests and taking a chance and you know, and letting me meet you guys, because I really appreciate meeting cool people like all the people I've had on, and it's awesome to bullshit and have somebody to talk to for a while. So thanks again, Guy. I really appreciate it.
No problem, Ricky. You just keep doing what you're doing, because I can tell you have a lot of passion for this. It's very genuine. I don't think we talked about before, some people may be in it for the wrong reasons. I think it's pretty evident to anyone listening that you're in it for all of the right reasons. And I'll be very interested, as I'm sure everyone else will be, in seeing how your show grows in the future. So, you know, please keep it up. Yeah,
once they finally come out with a podcast awards, we'll be talking about the good old days when we used to Skype. And I, you know, it's funny because I thought about that. I'm like, you know, how awesome would it be to have a podcast awards eventually, you know, and just have all the podcasters in one place at the same time, you know, just talking and hanging out. So maybe that's one day in the future. Who knows? People start sharing these things. You like my podcast, you like guys' podcast, tweet them, share them. You'll be surprised how many people you get, you know, just familiar with the names and the idea of a podcast, and just spark conversation by just sharing shows you like and episodes you like, and just you know, get the message out there. I mean, it's a great alternative to, you know, the mindless stuff that's on TV, and you know, you get to listen to something that might be thought provoking, and it's a great alternative to some of the crap that's out there. So it's you know, it definitely share it, retweet it. You don't think you're doing much. I know a lot of people enjoy these podcasts, but you know, probably 1% of the people who enjoy them actually share them and retweet them and all this stuff. So you know, that little part, you know, will go a long way with just kind of getting the message out there and just letting people know about these great shows you enjoy. So thanks again, Guy, and I'll be looking forward to hear your live show, and I'll be crossing my fingers because it could go really well, or you could get, you know, who knows who will call up. So you know, you're definitely taking a risk, but you know what? That's what's going to make for a great podcast. That excitement of nobody knowing what the hell is going to happen. So it'll definitely be a fun show. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, no problem. Well, hopefully you can call in as well, Ricky. And again, thanks a lot for having me on the show. I really enjoyed it.
All right, thanks, Guy. Keep in touch. Talk to you soon.